Hello, everybody. Welcome to our popcorn and poetry live discussion of Christabel. So, throughout the month of April, I did a mini readathon titled Popcorn and Poetry. And the only prompt was to read a romantic era poem with vampires or vampire symbolism. We had one group read, which was Christabel by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. So I asked around to see if anyone wanted to co host this live discussion with me, and I did not get a co host. So here we are. It's going to be a discussion as much as anyone happens to hop on, right? If you happen to catch this live stream after it's already done, then please feel free to comment, ask questions, put your thoughts forth. Today, we're just going to be super casual because that was one of the reasons why I titled it Popcorn and Poetry. Because I do like the alliteration, right, with the popcorn and poetry. But I also wanted to just be very casual about this because I know a lot of people can feel intimidated by poetry. So I just really wanted to show how interesting poetry can be. And then it doesn't have to be something that you feel too intimidated to invest some time in. So I am having some popcorn. I will try not to crunch too much, but now that I picked it up, I got that smell. I apologize for eating on camera, but I've got to have a little, right? And here's where a co-host would have come in really handy for me, because while my co-host was talking, I could have been, snacking without, too much of a distraction. Also, I am drinking blood. No, I'm just kidding. It's wine, but we are vampires today, right? But let me get a sip of this. And I will show you the kind of wine that I'm drinking just so you don't think it's actually blood, right? It is Robert Mondavi. This one is bourbon barrel aged Cabernet Sauvignon. And I'll read a little bit about the wine on the back just for, I don't know, just for funsies, right? This Cabernet Sauvignon blends the craftsmanship of California winemaking with the Southern tradition of bourbon whiskey barrel aging. The cool climate of our coastal vineyards imparts the wine with deep flavors of black cherry and blackberry. Select lots are then aged in bourbon whiskey barrels, delivering rich nuances of vanilla, brown sugar, and subtle toasted oak when added to the blend. So I'll see if I can pick up any of those wine notes while I'm drinking. So let's see. Yeah, I can taste some blackberry and then like some residual of vanilla. I am no wine connoisseur expert. I've been to a couple of wine tastings and I follow some, wine experts online. So that's the extent of my expertise there. But I don't think you're here for discussions of wine. So let's go ahead and get started on Christabel. So the way I'm going to do this is to start off by giving a little bit of background on the Romantic era, which is the time period in which Christabel was written, to talk a little bit too about the key elements of Romanticism, and to talk about some of the first and second generation poets, as well as to give you some background on Samuel Taylor Coleridge and also the concept of the sublime. So let's just start off talking a little bit about Romanticism or the Romantic movement. So this was a movement in literature and the arts that originated in the latter part of the 18th century. Romanticism focuses on inspiration, subjectivity, and the individual. A few key elements in Romanticism are emotion, nature, the supernatural, aesthetically pleasing imagery, imagination, and passion. So the Romantic movement was a backlash against the Enlightenment or Age of Reason that preceded the time of the Romantics. They really wanted to, as we just mentioned, focus on emotions, the individual, and nature, and that type of thing. Your first generation Romantic poets, one of which we're talking about today is Samuel Taylor Coleridge. You would also have in that first generation William Blake and William Wordsworth. After the first generation, you then had the second generation of Romantic poets. Some of the famous poets from the second generation would be Percy Bysshe Shelley, yes, husband of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. Lord Byron, the bad boy. He was called by one of his peers mad, bad, and dangerous to know. So Lord Byron is like the playboy of the Romantic poets. And John Keats would be another second generation Romantic poet. And I also want to mention Letitia Elizabeth Landon, or LEL. She was referred to as the female Lord Byron, and she wrote beautiful poetry. One of her poems that has some vampire symbolism in it is The Fairy of the Fountains. And I like to mention LEL because I feel like she doesn't get as much recognition as she deserves. And that is, obviously because she was a woman writing at the time of the Romantics. So the most focus would, of course, have been on the men who were writing. But with all of that being said, let's kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about this concept of the sublime, because that's going to be an important part of looking for vampire symbolism in Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Christabel. So before we talk about the sublime, I'm going to get another sip of wine here. Now, the sublime, according to Edmund Burke, and this is his book that I have, and this is a philosophical inquiry into the sublime and beautiful. According to Edmund Burke, the sublime comprises a state of astonishment. All of the emotions are suspended and the power of reason is lost. This is coupled with the infinity of an object that, or if it's a person, who cannot be seen distinctly and therefore cannot be compared against others. And part of that definition, too, comes from wordsworth.org. But really kind of a simple way to think about the sublime would be that it is an object or a person who evokes simultaneously within you a feeling of awe and also terror. A lot of times it's used when you think about aspects of nature, like if you are standing at the foot of an enormous mountain, you may get feelings of the sublime. It is beautiful to look at, but it also reminds you of just how small you are. Other aspects of the sublime would be the ocean, right? It's beautiful, but it's also dangerous. And so you're pulled to that, right? You're pulled to the allure of not only something that's beautiful, but also that element of danger, that forbidden fruit, so to speak. And again, that's really going to come into our discussion when we talk about vampire symbolism in Christabel. So before we actually get into the poem, one more thing that I want to do is to give you a little bit of background on Samuel Taylor Coleridge. Now, I haven't highlighted every part of his life to talk about, but only the parts that I feel like will really relate to the topic of vampire symbolism in Christabel. So let's get into it after I have some popcorn. Like I said, this is when I would turn, if I had a co-host, right, I would turn this part over to my co-host to give some initial thoughts on what they thought about the poem. But since I don't have one, I'm going to eat my popcorn real quick, just a little bit, right? Sorry. Okay. So even as a child, Samuel Taylor Coleridge was already an avid reader. He was especially interested in romance writings. And when we're talking about romance here, again, we're talking about like the uppercase R romantic movement, not the kind of romance that we think about in a lot of, circles of thinking about literature today. But he was interested in also mythology, folklore. He had a special interest in Eastern tales, such as the Arabian Nights. When Coleridge was in school, and then also when he went to university, he continued to read voraciously, particularly works of imagination and also visionary philosophy. When the French Revolution took place, this really, started to evoke in Coleridge this idea of somehow being able to circumvent the violence that destroyed the idealism of the French Revolution. And he wanted to kind of come away from society and to educate children according to certain principles that would, then be better than having them in the environment that led to the violence of the French Revolution. So he had a chance meeting with another poet, this poet, Robert Southey, and it led the two men to plan such a community near the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania, where they could come away and have their own little community established there. And to do this, Coleridge left Cambridge and began to set up this small community. And he also began to work alongside Southey as a lecturer in Bristol. However, shortly after this, Southey defected from this small community, and this left Coleridge kind of alone. And during this time, Coleridge still began to develop his mind intellectually, and he started to focus then on the nature of the human mind. And this is where he joined in partnership with William Wordsworth, and they entered upon one of the most influential creative periods of English literature, which we are talking about today, and that is the Romantic era. They published Lyrical Ballads, which was a joint poetry collection from both of them. Poems were included from Wordsworth and Coleridge. This was to be published in 1798. So we're going to skip on ahead, like I said, because there's a lot to say about Coleridge's life, but I just want to talk about just those aspects that really are, going to matter to us today in terms of vampire symbolism. So while Lyrical Ballads was going through to the press, Coleridge started a complimentary poem, which was a Gothic ballad entitled Christabel. And that is the poem that we are going to be talking about today. Now, I think it's important to note, too, that Coleridge and Wordsworth had a falling out. Coleridge had begun to fall in love with Sarah Hutchinson, who was the sister of Wordsworth's future wife. And at this time, Coleridge was already married to someone else. But he still hoped that he could somehow combine a kind of platonic love for Sarah, but still be faithful to his wife and children. And he wanted to continue to also be able to draw sustenance from the Wordsworth household. But this did not come about for him. And his health began to deteriorate. So he decided that spending time in a warmer climate would do him good. This was something that was very common during the Romantic era. If someone was ill, then they would be sent to a warmer climate, and that would hopefully be able to help them to get better. So in late 1804, Wordsworth then accepted a post in Malta as a secretary to the governor. While he was there, he was brought into contact with men who were handling the affairs of the state, and they kind of made him feel like he was lacking in forcefulness. And he felt like he needed to resolve once he returned to England to become more decisive, to become more what he thought manly, right? And within a few months, he decided to separate from his wife and to live with the Wordsworths. Coleridge at this time published The Friend, and then Sarah Hutchinson, who had been working along with him, felt like the strain of their relationship was too much, and so she left and returned to her brother's farm. Coleridge discovered that Wordsworth had apparently encouraged her to withdraw. So that really kind of put the rift between Coleridge and Wordsworth even further. After this, there was a very dark period in Coleridge's life. He began to struggle with opium addiction, and it retained a very powerful hold on him. And his writings from this period are very, symbolic and sometimes kind of really obvious in ways that he was suffering under that addiction to opium. And I bring that up too because one of the points that I'll bring up toward the end of our discussion of Christabel is how it can also be seen as Coleridge is dealing with his addiction to opium. So, like I said, that's really the main parts of Coleridge that really matter to us today. So I am going to now go ahead and have us talk a little bit about the poem itself. So I am going to pull it up in just a minute too and share the poem because I feel like that'll be easier as we're kind of going over some of the points if you can see the poem. So now that we've got that background on the Romantic movement, background on Coleridge, and the idea of the Sublime, let's just get right into it. So what I'm about to share with you now, these are some portions of a paper I wrote in grad school. The title of this paper is The Seductive Sublime Vampires in Coleridge's The Rama, the Ancient Mariner, and Christabel. So today we're just going to be looking at Christabel. But if you would like another video, it doesn't have to be a live show, but if you would like for me to do a video talking about vampire symbolism in the Rama, the Ancient Mariner, please let me know down in the comment section and I will be happy to do that. So let's just get started here. In Christabel, Samuel Taylor Coleridge draws on folklore, mythology, and superstition in order to illustrate the allure and the horror of the sublime in the form of a seductive vampire. So I'm going to get a sip of wine here before we go on. So while Edmund Burke argues that the beautiful and the sublime are indeed ideas of a very different nature, Coleridge's vampires embody both the beautiful and the sublime. In Christabel, the titular character is initially attracted to, but then later repulsed by Geraldine, who is our vampiric figure. Within this text, Coleridge alternates between reinforcing certain aspects of Burke's sublime while subverting others. So my argument in this paper was that Samuel Taylor Coleridge creates his own concept of Burke's sublime through vampire symbolism, a figure whose seductive power combines both the terror and the passion that exists within the dichotomy of the sublime. So the next part of my paper, I speak initially, for the most part, about the Rama, the Ancient Mariner. So I'm just going to move past all of that. But I feel like a lot of people who may not be familiar with the other works of Coleridge do know the Rama, the Ancient Mariner. So I'm always happy to talk about the vampire symbolism in that if you are interested. Meanwhile, I'm going to keep flipping through all these pages, right? So let's go now with Christabel. Here we are. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge depicts the sublime through serpent imagery in Christabel, and opening the poem really by alluding to the biblical story of the serpent's temptation of Eve. And this really kind of reveals how Coleridge is looking at this idea of the sublime, right? If we think about the serpent's temptation of Eve, the serpent appeared very beautiful to her, right? But she knew there was something forbidden that she was being told to do, right? Taking that forbidden fruit. So again, we think about the sublime as being something that's beautiful, but there's also that threat of danger there. Christabel opens in a wooded area, and this area mirrors a setting that is similar to the Garden of Eden. It is in this wooded area in which Christabel is, this wooded area is what we would call a liminal space. It's in between, right? It combines elements of both the natural and the supernatural. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the poem now, because like I said, I feel like this is a good way to talk about it when we can see it here. Let me see. So let's try this again. It's telling me. Why is it telling me that? Let's see again here. Let me see if I can scroll it up this way. For some reason, I can't see like the bottom part that's telling me what to do. Okay, well, I'm going to try this one more time, and then we would just go without this. I don't know. What's going on here? Let's see if this is going to let me do it. Okay, there we go. So, as I mentioned, this wooded area where Christabel finds herself at the beginning of the poem is a liminal space, combining both elements of the supernatural and the natural. The moss, the mistletoe, and the oak coexist with the richly clad, beautiful, vampiric Geraldine. And these aren't numbered either. So, yeah, I think this is not going to be my best option. So, I'm going to take that off and decide not to share it. I think that's going to be more confusing than anything. So, in Christabel, Coleridge draws on the Lamia myth, and he uses this forest as the setting for Christabel's first encounter with Geraldine. And the Lamia is known to dwell in forests and exhibit both human and animal characteristics. And that comes from a quote from Belisarius. And so the Lamia then is a serpent-like, vampiric-like creature. And we're looking at Geraldine as being this type of creature. So Coleridge gives the vampiric Geraldine serpentine symbolism, which embodies both the ecstasy and the dread of the sublime. The serpent-like Geraldine proves irresistible to the dove-like Christabel. Rummel writes that Geraldine, as the Lamia, has a reptile nature that is threatening, yet only half malignant. So by describing Geraldine as half malignant rather than wholly so, indicates the dualistic nature of her character, that she embodies both that beauty and that terror of the sublime. And I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to be quoting some people, so I will be leaving down in the description box. I'll go back and add to it the sources that I'm quoting from, just to make sure that my anyone that I'm using their thoughts for this video has proper credit. So going on, as Tiki writes about Geraldine, Geraldine's description does not portray her as evil incarnate, unless her good qualities are a veiled expression of her so-called evil. So Geraldine, although she does exhibit some of the characteristics that are similar to a Lamia, there's also an aspect to Geraldine's character that is lovely and not overtly cruel. So in describing her this way, Coleridge creates in her a unique version of the Lamia that depicts the beautiful and the terrible nature of the sublime. Christabel herself, too, possesses a dichotomous nature. Although she's often viewed as this innocent victim who happened to be out in the garden late at night and encountering Geraldine, there are ways to look at this that really counteract that belief. First of all, Christabel has ventured into the wood so late, right? If we look at lines 25 and 26. And in doing so, Christabel breaks with the traditional notion that it is improper for women to be out alone at night. And in addition to venturing outside in the middle of the night, Christabel doesn't pray in a church, right? In our poem, it states that Christabel prays beneath the huge oak tree. So Christabel is putting herself into a situation that invites an encounter with the sublime embodied in the figure of the vampire. As Twitchell writes, Christabel wants to do what she must not do. Therefore, the character of Christabel is one of ambiguity. Her actions reveal that she is not completely innocent in her encounter with the vampire. So these binaries of innocence and guilt, and the sublime and beautiful and terrible in Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Christabel are most clearly subverted when Christabel asks Geraldine to come home with her, and then she invites Geraldine to share her bed. Christabel lifts Geraldine up over the threshold of the gate. This is very interesting because in lifting Geraldine over that gate, she extends an invitation to this vampiric-like figure. She welcomes her into her home in an act that is reminiscent of a traditional groom's carrying his bride over the threshold on their wedding night. And this, according to, let me make sure I got my note, Rummel, really shows us how the complexity of Geraldine's nature as being neither fully good nor evil is also true for the experience that Geraldine induces. Thus, in this sense, her snake aspect is not so much demonic as it is an embodiment of sexual awareness. So in addition to Christabel's extending the invitation for Geraldine to enter her home, Christabel also seeks to keep Geraldine's presence a secret, as if she knows that she is crossing some kind of line into forbidden territory. Coleridge writes, "Oh, softly tread," said Christabel. "My father seldom sleepeth well." So we see that Christabel knows that by spending the night with Geraldine, she is committing a transgressive act, an act that she does not want her father to discover. So I'm going to get a little snack here again. Sorry about that. Okay. So in the way that Coleridge depicts this encounter between Christabel and Geraldine, he dispenses with traditional heterosexual context. When Geraldine gets into bed with Christabel, there is no pseudo-phallus that appears to secure any kind of heterosexual framework. Also, the events of the night that Christabel and Geraldine spend together are never fully explained, so they remain a semi-private act between these two women. As a result of this, Coleridge makes lesbianism sublime by leaving a blank space in the text that marks an event so burdened with sublime horror that it cannot even be spoken. That is a quote from Elfenbein, and I'm going to be sharing, like I said, the titles of those works at the end of the video and in the description box. Furthermore, too, when Coleridge leaves this experience or this act that takes place between Christabel and Geraldine, leaves it in that kind of blank space, he's also reshaping the hegemonic center tradition into a feminine voice. Rather than centering the male view, Coleridge focuses on the two women of the poem. Moreover, instead of depicting Christabel as a victim who is tricked by this vampiric Geraldine, Coleridge instead creates in her a character who is drawn to the seductive Geraldine. Christabel entreats Geraldine to drink the cordial wine of virtuous powers that her mother made of wild flowers, which again evokes marriage symbolism. More marriage symbolism is also revealed when Christabel states, "I have heard the gray-haired friar tell how on her deathbed my mother did say that she should hear the castle bell strike 12 upon my wedding day." Tiki writes, Christabel's expected marriage is unquestionably within the conventional and heterosexual frame. However, Christabel transgresses her mother's expectation by engaging in a sensual act with the vampiric Geraldine. Thus, as Elfenbein writes, Coleridge demonstrates his originality as a would-be genius by treating sex between two women as an activity that fits into no topical context and cannot be quickly assimilated into any tradition of representation. As part one of Christabel progresses, the signs of male heterosexual authority slowly evaporate before a magical otherworldly space dominated by women. So, in breaking this traditional mode by which lesbianism was typically presented, Coleridge constructs the interaction between Christabel and Geraldine as an introduction or initiation rite of Christabel into womanhood. In this way, Christabel is viewed as crossing the threshold that separates childhood innocence from the world of adulthood, once again evoking the span of the liminal space. Sorry, there is a gnat in my way. Liminal space and the allure of the sublime. As such, Geraldine is not a predatory vampire, but is instead a symbol of sexual awakening in the form of the seductive vampiric woman. Throughout Christabel, Samuel Taylor Coleridge casts his vision of the sublime through vampiric eye symbolism and imagery. In Christabel, Geraldine's gaze is partially responsible for her power over Christabel and Christabel's father, Sir Leoline. Geraldine, according to Rummel, is endowed with the piercing eye that was so prominent in the fatal women of the Gothic and that also distinguishes the ancient mariner. Therefore, through Coleridge's depictions of the symbolic power of eyes, he weaves elements of dark romanticism into this poem to illustrate the sublime nature of the vampire's gaze. Christabel desires to break free from the spell that has been cast upon her. However, she cannot resist the simultaneously alluring and terrifying eye of Geraldine. Now, the next part of my paper, I'm going to skip over again because it talks more so about the rhyme of the ancient mariner and how it connects to Christabel. But let's skip on that for now and move on to Christabel again. In Christabel, Samuel Taylor Coleridge once again employs the use of eye symbolism and imagery to depict the sublime nature of the vampiric figure. For example, when Geraldine banishes the spirit of Christabel's deceased mother, the symbolism of the eyes plays a prominent role in Coleridge's depiction of the sublime. He writes, Alas, what ails poor Geraldine, who stares she... Let me have another sip of wine. Maybe that's my problem. I can't read. No. All right, let's try this again. We're looking at the symbolism of eyes and how they play a prominent role in Coleridge's depiction of the sublime. In Christabel, Coleridge writes, Alas, what ails poor Geraldine? Why stares she with unsettled eye? Can she the bodiless dead espy? At this point, Christabel wonders at Geraldine's supernatural ability to see and speak with the dead. Furthermore, Geraldine's fear that Christabel's ghostly mother will interfere with her plans is revealed through her reaction. This reaction leads to her unsettled eye, as Coleridge describes it. So Geraldine's eyes are described as brightly glittering. And then quickly following that description, Christabel submits to Geraldine's command to disrobe and join her in bed, thereby alluding to the sublime power of the vampire's seductive gaze. Coleridge writes, Quoth Christabel, so let it be. And as the lady bade, did she, her gentle limbs did she undress and lay down in her loveliness. So while Christabel is to some degree under Geraldine's spell, she's also a willing participant in the encounter that takes place between the two of them. Even under the seductive gaze of Geraldine, Christabel retains the ability to reject Geraldine's advances, but she doesn't. As Twitchell argues, Christabel knows what she is doing is potentially explosive, but she does it anyway. It is only after the interaction takes place between Christabel and Geraldine that Christabel regrets her decision. And only then does she begin to look at Geraldine as some kind of purely evil threat. Coleridge writes, And see the lady Christabel gathers herself from out of her trance, and tears she sheds. Therefore, through the juxtaposition of her mixed feelings towards Geraldine and toward her own role in their sensual encounter, Christabel embodies the dualistic nature of the sublime. Her loss of innocence during the night spent with Geraldine is an act that is both liberating yet gently or guiltily rather submissive. As such, Christabel's changing responses to Geraldine illustrate the ambiguity of the sublime, that which allures us in because of its beauty, but then evokes a threat of danger or terror within us. I see a comment. I'm so sorry. I've just been going on. I'm glad you popped in. Let's see. Let me show Lauren's comment. I'm glad you popped in. This is feeling very unhinged. It's scattered. So I'm glad you popped in. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I hope you have a nice time at the wedding that you're going to. Thank you so much for popping in. So we were talking about this reaction that Christabel has, this changing response to Geraldine, right? The way that she's pulled in by Geraldine's beauty, but then she is terrified of Geraldine's hold over her. We also see Geraldine's own shifting nature, and Coleridge reveals that through the version of Geraldine that she wishes to show to others. So it is often through the changing of her eyes that Geraldine discloses that side of herself that she wants others to see. So, for example, when Geraldine looks at Christabel's father, Sir Leoline, her eyes appear innocent and blue. But then she looks at Christabel, who now sees Geraldine's eyes as being serpent eyes. Thus, Geraldine has the power to be both terrible and beautiful in the way that she embodies Coleridge's sublime. As a result, through her vampiric gaze, Geraldine is able to place both Christabel and Sir Leoline under her spell. Coleridge writes, Christabel in dizzy trance, stumbling on the unsteady ground. Christabel is first entranced by Geraldine's beauty, but then later she's entranced by her fear of Geraldine, and also by her fear that her father will discover that she and Geraldine shared a bed the previous night. As Tiki writes, even when Christabel refuses to tell the truth to her father, she is afraid of his reaction, but not really afraid of actually expressing remorse, or not. Let me rephrase that. She is afraid of what her father will say. She's afraid of how her father will react if he discovers that she shared her bed with Geraldine the night before. But what she is not really feeling is remorse over the act. It's more of a fear of being caught. Therefore, it is because of this fear of discovery that Christabel begs her father to send Geraldine away. But on the other hand, her father is now so enthralled by Geraldine's hypnotic gaze that he chooses Geraldine over the desires of his own daughter. When Christabel tries to warn her father about Geraldine, he gets angry and responds by saying, that Christabel is dishonoring him, as Coleridge writes. His heart was cleft with pain and rage. His cheeks, they quivered. His eyes were wild. Dishonored thus in his old age, dishonored by his only child. So after Sir Leoline has fallen under Geraldine's seductive gaze, he is now bewitched. And then his eyes are described as being wild eyes. So finally, we see the depiction of the alluring vampire of Geraldine as symbolic of the sublime experience of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, possibly in his use of opium. So I mentioned at the outset of our discussion that Samuel Taylor Coleridge did have an opium addiction. And so one reading of this poem could be that it is Coleridge's own grappling with the sublime nature of his opium addiction. So let me get to that part, because the next few pages are about the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So let's talk about how in Christabel we could read this as Coleridge is grappling with his opium addiction. In Christabel, Coleridge also depicts through vampire symbolism the effects of opium. After Christabel spends the night with Geraldine, she seems to be in a hypnagogic state. As a result, she's unable to convey to her father the threat that Geraldine poses. Coleridge writes, "For what she knew, she could not tell, or mastered by the mighty spell." Therefore, although Christabel knew the risk of being involved with Geraldine, she nevertheless gave into the temptation of the sublime and is now powerless to warn others against doing the same. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge depicts throughout Christabel the dualistic nature of the sublime through the theme of vampire symbolism. Rather than separating the beautiful from the terrible, Coleridge's vampires embody both aspects, thus creating a seductive version of the sublime, which proves to be irresistible to Christabel and to her father, Sir Leoline. Therefore, Coleridge's sublime can only be properly understood in terms of its profound dependence on the beautiful. That is from Blake Allen's article, Coleridge, Sublimity or Beauty. So as demonstrated in our discussion, right, Samuel Taylor Coleridge interprets Edmund Burke's Sublime through vampire characters and situations, thereby creating a uniquely Coleridgean version of the sublime in the form of the vampire. So that is all I have for this discussion. I know it was a bit scattered. I felt like I had prepared well for it, but then my tech didn't exactly do what I wanted to when I wanted it to share the screen. And I got a little flustered, which I guess part of this is being live, right? But I do want to share some of the books that I recommend and some of the books that I used as resources in this conversation. The one we already talked about is Edmund Burke's book, The Philosophical a philosophical inquiry into the sublime and the beautiful. Another book. This book is a Penguin classic, the Penguin Book of Romantic Poetry, edited by Jonathan and Jessica Wordsworth. Then we have The Living Dead. This is a study of the vampire in romantic literature. This is by, there's a glare, I'm sorry about that ring light, James B. Twitchell. We have Romantic Genius, the Prehistory of a Homosexual Role, and this is Andrew Elfenbein. Then we have Andrea Rummel's Delusive Beauty, Femme Fatales in English Romanticism. And this is my actual textbook from grad school, The Age of Romanticism, and this is the Broadview Anthology of British Literature. I will link those and any of the articles and essays that I quoted from in the description box. Thank you for tuning in. If you catch this on replay, then I would definitely love to hear from you. What are your thoughts? Would you like to see another discussion on vampire symbolism in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner? And thank you for hanging in here with me in this wild video. Bye.